Hellfire Jack: The Life and Legacy of Major General Sir John George Dartnell. Episode 6: The End of an Era. In 1894, it was decided to amalgamate all the various police and paramilitary forces of Natal. The Natal Mounted Police, the Borough Police, the various local board police forces, the magisterial native police, messengers and convict guards, the magisterial patrol police, and the water police into the Natal Police. Despite the Natal Mounted Police having been more a paramilitary unit than a pure police unit, Dartnell had been promoted to colonel and was the obvious choice to serve as the chief commissioner of this new force, as noted by the Attorney General in the second reading of the police bill. Quote, "A difficulty would have arisen in the matter of selecting a chief commissioner for the new Natal Police had it not been for the loyalty of the public for the service of Colonel John George Dartnell. He was told what the wishes of the government were to consolidate the different forces. He was addressed in the capacity he is known so well to fill, that of a dashing soldier, and he was asked whether, having regard to the necessities of the case, he would accept the position of chief commissioner. We knew perfectly well that if that distinguished officer said he would, we might rely absolutely on his exact fulfillment of the duties of the office. I am glad to say that without the least reserve of hesitation, he stated that he would comply with the wish of the government. We found a most complete accord between Colonel Dartnell and ourselves as regards the general control of the force. He knew as well as we all know that the peculiar character of the population here requires a police force which can move about in a strong body when necessity arises." Close quote. Dartnell set about the establishment of the new Natal police force with dynamism and gusto, increasing the number of white officers from 200 to 300, as well as recruiting an additional 100 native officers. 11 police districts were established, with the number of outstations increased from 26 to 60. In the first year of the Natal Police, the number of arrests rose from 2,564 to 16,568. Indeed, so successful was the organization which Dartnell created that it was ultimately copied in all the other colonies of South Africa. The number of officers continued to grow. In 1898, the Zululand Native Police was also merged into the Natal Police, and 10 police stations were established in Zululand. One of the notable achievements of the Natal Police was the introduction for the first time in Africa of fingerprinting for forensic identification purposes. The world's first forensic fingerprint office had been established in Calcutta, India, in 1897. Sub-Inspector, later Chief Commissioner, W. J. Clark of the Natal Police's Criminal Investigation Department was so convinced of the value of the system in law enforcement that in 1898 he launched it at his own expense. Eventually, the system was officially approved, and after increasing numbers of arrests and convictions, fingerprinting became standard police procedure in Natal. The use of fingerprinting by the Natal Police was so successful in solving crimes in South Africa that the Natal Police Department had more fingerprints on file than any other similar office in the British Commonwealth, including Scotland Yard in England. Major General Dartnell became a celebrity of the Army when his picture and photo were published in the book Celebrities of the Army. It was printed in England and had a summary of the careers of the most famous British Army officers of the 1800s. This is the article that was written about Brigadier General Dartnell before he became Major General Dartnell. I will read the contents of this article to you now. There is perhaps no man better known in the colony of Natal than Brigadier General John George Dartnell, who for 26 years has been the commandant of the local mounted police, which he has raised to a high state of efficiency. Born in London, Ontario, Canada in 1838, He received his first commission as an ensign in the 86th Royal County Down Regiment on July 22, 1855, and at once joined headquarters in India. His name was down for purchase, and when a lieutenancy became vacant in November 1856, he was advanced to the higher rank. The Indian Mutiny broke out in the following year, and young Dartnell took to the field with the gallant County Downs. The regiment was quartered in the Bombay Presidency, and thus found itself told off for duty with the Central India Field Force, under General Hugh Rose, afterwards Field Marshal Lord Strathnairn. Lieutenant Dartnell was present at the storm and capture of Chundari, and led the only successful escalade attack on the fortress of Jhansi. He was severely wounded in the assault. These are the actual bloodstains. And these 3 fingers were cut off. But his heroic conduct was brought to notice in dispatches. It was hoped that he would be awarded the Victoria Cross, which he fairly earned, but some difficulties arose to prevent his being so decorated, and he had to rest satisfied with the medal and clasp, and the official intimation that in recognition of his brilliant achievement, his name had been noted for special promotion. This soon came, for on May 13, 1859, he was appointed to a company in the 2nd Battalion, 16th Regiment, and joined in England. Service at home was not, however, to his liking, so he effected an exchange to the 27th Inniskilling Regiment in 1861 and returned to India, where in January 1864 he received the gratifying news that Her Majesty, in consideration of his distinguished gallantry during the mutiny, had promoted him to a brevet majority. In the following year, he came again under fire as aide-de-camp to Major General Toome, V.C., which means Victoria Cross, in the Bhutan expedition, including the recapture of Dewangiri. For this service, he was highly commended and received the Frontier Medal with clasp. His progress in the service seemed then to be assured, but he hankered after a wider field of enterprise than the army at that time presented, and shortly afterwards sold out and went to Natal, Africa, to take up the position of Chief of the Mounted Police Force, which he was called upon to organize. As Colonel Commandant of the Mounted Police and of the Natal Volunteers, he was continually employed during the South African troubles of 1877, 78, and 79, for which he wears the war medal. This is a picture of the Natal Mounted Police Barracks, which was built by Colonel Heim and is located on Alexandra Road in Pietermaritzburg and completed in 1890. It is a heritage site and is still used as a police station. This is a picture of Police Commandant John George Dartnell and his police staff standing in front of the Natal Mounted Police Barracks cannons. These are the same 2 cannons seen in the previous picture of the barracks. An officer who was closely associated with him during that period has written to a friend, quote, "Of all the capable, self-reliant, brave, and clear-headed soldiers I ever met, I consider Dartnell out and away the best. His retirement was an irreparable loss to the Army, for having been trained in an Indian school only, he has none of the littleness of the homemade article." It has been placed on record many times what Lord Chelmsford thinks of him. For did he not lead the left flanking force of his lordship's column from Isandlwana? In the present campaign, Brigadier General Dartnell has been infatigable. It was to his wonderful grasp of the situation that Major General Ewell was able to carry through so successfully the withdrawals from Dundee. After Sir Penn Simmons had been laid low in that difficult operation, General Ewell relied implicitly on Colonel Dartnell's judgment. On reaching Ladysmith, Dartnell was raised to the rank of Brigadier General and placed in command of the Natal Volunteers. Of him, a staff officer wrote during the siege, "Dartnell, who covered himself with credit again during the march from Dundee, is here the life and soul of the camp. It is scarcely to be wondered at that he is so popular, for as the leader of men, I doubt whether he has an equal anywhere. This is saying a great deal, but is not saying too much, as anyone who knows him will admit. This is the end of Celebrities of the Army article. The following story reflects the general's dry humor. Two of his troopers, Catley and Johnson, had been out on the lake fishing in a boat which they had pulled ashore. When they noticed that the boat had drifted away, they jumped into a nearby waterlogged skiff and rowed after their vanishing craft. As their skiff began to sink, they panicked as one trooper rowed madly while the other bailed for dear life. But bailing as hard as he could, the old craft sank anyway within a few yards of shore. Johnson, who could not swim, would have surely been drowned had not his colleague pulled him back to shore. Bedraggled and cheerless in their muddy, water-soaked uniforms, the two troopers were horrified when they ran into General Dartnell, who was walking along the beach. When angry, Dartnell had a curious habit of holding the fingers of one hand aloft in the air, and this was known by everyone to be a sure sign of coming punishment. For a moment he eyed the pair of miscreants severely and demanded, "Have you two fallen in the water?" The question was rasped out in a tone of severe disapproval. "No, sir," said Cantley, wondering what was coming. Dartnell's fingers were waving furiously when he asked Johnson, "Has this man upset you in a boat?" Johnson replied, "We went out in a boat that sank, and he pulled me out, sir." Dartnell answered, "I am living in a hut up there on the right." And then he mustered his severest voice and shouted, "Go to my room." Then with a twinkle in his eye and a slight smile on his face, he said, "You will find a bottle containing whiskey. Drink half of it and see that Cantley gets the other half." Then General Dartnell walked off without waving his fingers again. Celebrities of the Army was written before Brigadier General Dartnell was raised to the higher rank of Major General, which rank he still held until his retirement and death. This is an actual photo of Major General Sir John George Dartnell's medals. This shows Dartnell's 2 knighthood orders and medals. Number 1 is Knight Commander of the Order of the Bath, KCB, which is a knighthood order. Number 2 is Companion of the Order of St. Michael and St. George, which is a secondary knighthood order that Dartnell also received, and the abbreviation for that one is CMG. Number 3 is the Colonial Auxiliary Forces Officers Decoration. Number 4 is the Indian Mutiny Medal. Number 5 is the India General Service Medal of 1854. Number 6 is the South African Medal of 1880. Number 7 is the Cape of Good Hope General Service Medal. Number 8 is the Queen's South Africa Medal. Number 9 is the King's South Africa Medal. And number 10 is the Natal Native Rebellion Medal. After the unification of South Africa in 1910, the days of the colonial police forces were numbered. In 1913, the Natal Police ceased to exist, and its men were assigned either to a military unit of the South African Mounted Rifles or the South African Police and South African Prison Service. In the 40 years of its existence, the Natal Mounted Police, later known as Natal Police, had fought in 2 wars, 3 rebellions, and countless other minor skirmishes, a record that is probably not equaled by any other police force in the late Victorian and Edwardian times. During that time, he had been advanced in rank from major to colonel, then to brigadier general, and finally to major general in the Second Boer War. In total, John Dartnell had served the people of the Natal colony for 50 years. It is an overused cliché to say that an officer was loved by his men, but in the case of Dartnell, it really was the case. Though as regimental as a button stick and blessed with indomitable bravery, Dartnell was only severe with his men when it was really required, and seems to have been viewed very much as a strict but kindly father figure. It was said that his condemnation and commendation were just, and made those men who received them better men than they ever thought they could be. General Dartnell erred only in his charity and mercy. He had the confidence of his men and always considered their troubles as his own. He was faithful to those under him, and they were faithful to him and loved him. His troopers described him as having the courage of a lion and the heart of a woman, and they talked of him in glowing, perhaps even reverential terms. In early 1903, Dartnell retired from the force he had created and led for almost 30 years. When Major General Dartnell received his government pension, he left Africa for England to see out his last few years. This is Dartnell's final residence in this building at 9 Westbourne Gardens, Folkestone, England. For years after his retirement, old Natal police troopers would tell new recruits that they would have happily followed Dartnell into Hades because of the faith they had in Major General Sir John George Dartnell's ability to get them out again, the man they affectionately named Hellfire Jack. Major General Sir John George Dartnell died at 76 years of age on August 7th, 1913, at Folkestone, Eltham, Kent, England. He was buried on August 11th, 1913, in Folkestone, Cheriton Road Cemetery, Folkestone, England, United Kingdom. Dartnell's funeral services were probably held in St. Mary's Church at Folkestone, England. This is the entrance to the Folkestone Cemetery on Cheriton Road where Dartnell is buried. From left to right, this is my brother, Jeff Garfield, my father, Ted Garfield, and me, Jared Garfield, at Dartnell's grave. Hello, this is Jared Garfield again. When I was 19 years old, I was sent by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to serve a 2-year mission in the country of New Zealand. My grandma Garfield was 80 years old then. She cried at the airport before I boarded the plane because she feared that she would not be alive when I returned from my 2-year mission. I gave her my heartfelt promise that she would stay alive until I came back and visited with her. We wrote letters to each other while I was gone. My grandmother moved from our home in Linden, Utah, to the state of Washington to spend her last years with her daughter, Alice. I had only been home from my mission a few days when my father received a phone call from his sister Alice saying that their mother had been admitted to the hospital in serious condition. My dad flew us in his private plane to Washington State to see his mother and my grandma. When we arrived at the hospital, Grandma was very weak. My father and I had to lean close to her to hear the words that she was saying. We had a very sweet but short visit before she went into a coma. My father and I placed our hands on my grandmother's head as my dad gave her a priesthood blessing of comfort and told her, "There are people in heaven waiting for you on the other side." And Dad assured her that she had lived a good life and it was all right for her to pass on to be with her family in heaven. I felt very comforted by that blessing. When I opened my eyes, I saw that Dad and I were both very tearful. Alice and I wanted to stay up all night with Grandma. My father was very tired and decided to leave us so he could get some sleep at Alice's home. After he left, Aunt Alice and I sat at Grandma's bedside and took turns holding Grandma's hand. We spent the entire night talking about Grandma, sometimes laughing and sometimes weeping, as we each shared the wonderful stories we remembered about Grandma's amazing life. I told my aunt that I felt a little bit weak, and I was also hungry because I had eaten nothing since we had left Provo, Utah, and flown to Washington with my father. Alice said there was a cafeteria in the hospital where we could get something to eat. We really did not want to leave Grandma's bedside, but we decided to go and get some food and then hurry back to Grandma as soon as possible. We did hurry back, but by the time we got there, Grandma had already left to join her family on the other side of the veil. Alice had been there with us when my father and I had given Grandma her final blessing. She and I were both filled with a wonderful feeling of peace because we knew Grandma was in the midst of a magnificent reunion with all of her departed loved ones. But even more important, we knew that Noonie Violet DeStamps Valancy Garfield had also lived a wonderful life and left behind her own legacy that would also bless her descendants for the rest of their lives. When Grandma's remaining family assembled for the reading of her will, I was given the same metal box that my grandma had shown me years earlier. It contained an original colorized picture of General Dartnell, and as you could see, it had some cracks in it. It also had a gold Maltese cross military decoration that Grandfather Dartnell had picked up on a battlefield in India, and the British redcoat worn by the very young Lieutenant Dartnell at the fortress of Johnsey so many years ago. Ever since that day, I have treasured that British redcoat and shown it to hundreds of people. Now I am sharing it with you, to pass on the legacy of my grandma and the stories of her beloved Hellfire Jack. General Dartnell is gone. My grandma Garfield is gone. My dad and mom, Ted and Anita Garfield, are gone. And it won't be very long before I am also gone. The real question at this point in life is not so much about what they did with their lives, but about what have you and I done with our lives. I encourage you to search out the history of your ancestors. Some of them may be famous, and some of them may be infamous, but most of them were decent, common people. The point is, they are your ancestors, and you have the right to pick which ones have lived the kind of lives that you would like to emulate, and which ones were bad examples, which you can be thankful to know better than to repeat. I have grown closer to my ancestors while I worked on this documentary, and I also feel that they have grown closer to me. Now is a great time to start learning about your ancestors and deciding what kind of legacy you would like to leave for your children. Sincerely, Jared Thomas Garfield, Sr. These photographs are of my great-great-grandparents, Major General Sir John George Dartnell and his wife, Clara Alicia Dartnell, my great-grandparents, Henry DeStamps Valancy and his wife, Alice Gertrude Valancy, my grandparents, Louis and Noonie Garfield, my parents, Ted and Anita Garfield, and that is me, Jared, and my wife, Valerie Garfield. Credits. Many paragraphs, quotes, and pictures used in these videos were taken from the internet, as well as a number of written publications. I wish to give special credit to H.P. Holt for his book, The Natal Mounted Police, and I have the link below. Also, Chris Bulldog Ash for his website, Hellfire Jack Dartnell, Natal Police, and there's the link below that. And then finally to Wikipedia for their internet article on John George Dartnell at the link I listed below. This is the end of episode 6 and the end of Hellfire Jack. Thank you for the time you spent with me celebrating the life of my Grandma Garfield and her remarkable grandfather, Hellfire Jack.